Good morning, everyone. See everyone popping on in here. Thanks so much for attending another episode of our coffee talk here. And a couple of things before we get started here. First off, I want to welcome our guest here, Larry Knapp. Larry, how you doing this morning?
I'm doing just great, thank you. Having
Yeah,
a
we're
great time.
thrilled to have you on here. We're gonna have some fun. For those of you who haven't, attended a coffee talk, it's very casual. But you can put your any questions you have for Larry. Feel free to throw it in the chat, or if you want, toward the end, we'll go and open it up to Q&A. And if you want to come off mute and say anything you want, question for Larry, you can do it then. So we encourage everyone to, either use the chat or come off mute at the end. And that's pretty much the only thing I need to tell you here. So other than that's a simple process. So we've done, Larry, we've had so far on here, the whole kind of purpose of the coffee talk was really to let our subscribers see kind of an inside look of MLS listings. So we've had, Mark Messimer, my boss, has been on here. We've had, let's see, who do we have here? We on Mark. We had Robert Bustamante, of course. So a lot of the directors. And we're gonna have Dave Wetzel on here eventually. When I know he's a busy guy and over at NAR right now, but so we plan on having him, and we're thrilled to have you, of course, because you've got 50. I said 50. You got 56 years in the industry, and I think we titled this "Shaping the Industry." So we got a lot of ground to cover here, but I figure. Before we start, let's maybe go ahead and tell everyone you kind of bona fides here, because you've covered a lot of ground with a lot of companies and a lot of serious positions here. I mean, you back in what? Let's start with back in 1985 to 97, Caldwell Banker, President and COO, right? Then Western Region, Senior VP from 97 to 2001. Alan Pinnell, President and COO of 2003 to 2009. Then over to Lion Real Estate, CEO, 2010 to 2012. And I believe you've been with MLS Listings ever since, about over 10 years, right?
Well, ironically, the date I chose for my retirement is the 10th anniversary with MLS listings. And it was a huge surprise. I was having so much fun working with MLS listings that on my ninth anniversary, they announced it at an all-company meeting, and I almost fell out of my chair. I had no idea I had been having fun for those 9 years.
That's a
But
fantastic way.
maybe the most important thing is that what you just outlined. For most of my career, I was a broker running a brokerage company. And starting with Coldwell Banker Northern California, I was running large brokerage companies and all that comes with that. So, and then for the last 10 years of my career, and this is the end of it, I'm not doing anything after the 1st of July. Uh, I spent with the multiple listing service, which is ironic because as a broker, both at Coldwell Banker, Alon Pinnell Realtors, and Lion, I was an advocate for the consolidation of MLSs. I worked very hard over many years trying to bring about change, and that's what brought me into MLS listings. Um,
Fantastic. Yeah, I should have pointed out first off, congratulations on your upcoming retirement. For those of you in the
okay,
crowd that maybe aren't too aware of that, yeah, we still got you for one more month though. So, we're gonna pick your brain here. Um,
29 days.
29 days and counting the days. Fantastic. No, but you're a beloved part of MLS listings and will always be. We're lucky to have you and had you here for these years. I guess to start off, so to kind of lay the foundation, is kind of letting me know because you were president and CEO, of at one point of four of the largest residential brokerages in the nation, right?
Well, each of the companies that I ran was one of the largest in the country. Coldwell Banker Northern California at the time was probably, they didn't have a good way of clarifying, was probably the largest. Alon Pinnell Realtors was the largest a privately owned company in California for the time that I was running it and thereafter. So they're large companies. In fact,
Definitely.
Lion was the smallest, which that was sort of a special needs thing. They had about 1,000 agents. Alon Pinnell had about 15. Well, my job was to grow it. So I think we went from 1,300 to something like 1,700 agents. And at the high point at Coldwell Banker, Northern California, there was 4,000 agents. So large companies with a lot of offices and a lot of responsibilities
Definitely.
and
Now,
headaches.
So in terms of shaping the industry here, and we're going to get to like the technology part, part of it and everything. But I guess to start off, there's, today's real estate looks a lot different, but a lot of it we still see, big mergers and acquisitions. But you were a part of that, in the heyday there in the 80s and 90s. What were some of the major kind of mergers and acquisitions that you were part of that kind of helped shape this industry to where it is today?
Well, if you look at maybe the intent of this meeting to talk about changes, consolidation of the industry is
Mhm.
a change over time. The franchising, there was a time when franchising was a big change. Now it's sort of commonplace. But
Right.
um, I enjoy, and hats off to Compass to what a great job they've done in terms of consolidating the brokerage industry. So let's just say, I guess, starting in the late 2015 pluses. But people forget, particularly people who haven't been around very long, that in the late 90s and early 2000s, what is today Realogy, then was known as Sendant, and before that HFS, actually accomplished a much bigger consolidation for that period of time. And in California, I'll focus on the peninsula, on the Northern California market.
Sure.
We actually, at that point, I was in charge of all of California, and we bought just about every major brokerage company there in Northern California. Some will remember Cornish and Carey, Fox and Carskadden, Contempo Real Estate, Prudential of California, which was a statewide brokerage company, including Southern California. For those who knew Southern California, we bought Fred Sands and John Douglas, and frankly, dozens more, all within about a 5 year period of time. And I got a kick out of watching as Compass made these acquisitions and people saying, oh my God, they're going to control the business, they're going to take over, blah, blah, blah. Well, that's what they said about NRT back then. And we certainly gained a great market share, which stands today. It's a great company. But we didn't take over the business. And I always used to say that everybody benefits from a consolidation because people who didn't like the company that bought them, like didn't like, my job was to say, yeah, we're a big company, we just bought you, but you love us if you just give us a chance. Well,
Mhm.
some people didn't, and they would have gone off and they went to companies like Alon Pinnell and like Intero would be today. And so, but it certainly shook up the industry and that happened earlier, and it has happened again. So that's an example of how, if you're looking for what I've seen in 56 years of change, one of them is that a periodic consolidation, because there are probably too many brokerage companies. There's probably too many agents as well, but there are too many
Sure.
brokerage companies. So,
Sure. Yeah, I think one thing is gonna be evident as we kind of have this conversation today is while a lot of things have changed, a lot of things still are kind of the same, even today, right? But one of the things that has changed is, how's kind of the role of the brokerage kind of evolved in your career? Because we were talking, and one of the big things was, the difference between what the broker represent, was more of a broker was king to more of an agent centric role today. Um,
well, yeah, there were a couple of things. First of all, when I started, it was all broker. The broker There was typically a 50-50 split between the agent and the brokers. And if you had an extraordinary agent, well, then they might go to a 60% split. And what that really meant was that the broker, and all those years ago, most of these were independent brokers. They were men or women who set up a company, they started a real estate company, they brought in agents, and they ran the business. And it really was a business, much more of a broker governed business than it is today. And the broker paid for all of the office, the desks, the office equipment, staff, training, advertising. Back then, newspaper advertising was huge, and they decided what got advertised and when. And the agents were told, you just go out and sell, and we cover everything. And it evolved over time, and what I'm going to say for good reason, it evolved over time to where today a brokerage company, actually, I don't even have the current numbers, but I'm going to guess the brokerage company is lucky to get 10 or 15 cents on the dollar of revenue. that the brokerage company of all those years ago got 40 or 50 cents on the dollar of revenue. But what happened, this is an industry sort of 80-20, and that is, for the most part, 20% of the people generate 80% of the revenues, and you can play with those numbers all you want. But everybody doesn't generate equally into the revenue pool, and the agents who were really good realized that they might be able to spend their company dollars better than the brokers did, or at least more for their benefit. And edging over time and competition between brokerage companies forced up, the percentage that the agents took. So now agents, and then you can even add, another evolution would be put into the teams category. So now it's not just an agent generating a lot of revenues and said, look, I don't want to pay so much into the company. I want to spend my own advertising money, and I want to decide how I market myself. And so you don't have to pay for me. I'll pay for myself, and you give me a higher split. That's a quick rundown of how it's gone. But so that's an evolution, that has happened over my time in the business. And um,
Yeah, and you mentioned risk management is kind of along those lines of change as well too, right?
well, that's true. And actually, as I'm fading out of the industry and will not be liable for anything anymore, after this meeting, if I don't say anything wrong, I won't be liable anymore for anything. Um, the broker took on a very, very strong position of risk management in terms of teaching their agents, advising their agents on how to do the business right. And back then and today, it isn't any different. And that is, I think there are brokerage companies who spend a lot of energy and effort and time wanting to do the business right and making sure their agents are all qualified to be out there serving the general public. And then there are some who didn't pay that much attention to it. And that has always been a big differentiator among different companies and different brands. But as that was always the broker's sort of strength, is
Mm,
providing that. And I'm
right.
not just saying seminars, because I mean today everybody doesn't get seminars, but all of the companies that I ran and most of the companies that I respected had people like Bill Jansen or Vicky Nadorf and others who were lawyers who would come in and teach the agents just how to do everything the right way. And in my view, over the past, particularly over the last 20 years, the attention to those details has slid. And to me, and I'm going to sound like an old fogey here, but
Yeah.
I'm concerned that there's a lot of agents out there who don't really get any direction in terms, and all well intended. I think the agents are hardworking. They're doing what they think they need to do to be successful. But I have a sense that there's a lot of agents who don't get the proper guidance and training on just how to do everything right in a transaction. I'm surprised we don't hear more about it, but we never have. So I guess that's just how it is.
Gotcha. Yeah, well, I'd agree with you on some of this. But and along those lines of of the brokerage kind of that role changing, I gotta ask you, in terms of clients, right? Do you think, have you seen a difference between maybe client expectations, back in the, maybe 90s and early 2000s compared to today, especially in, high demand markets like, California?
Well, we can always look at the internet as a game changer. And to me, there's a lot of things that the internet did that was good, including a lot in real estate. And before the internet, and it was never, I don't think it was ever intentional. Everybody tried to expose their listings to the broadest possible group, to get a buyer and the best price for a seller. But you were limited to the multiple listing service, and you were limited to newspaper advertising and limited to whatever those traditional markets were at the time. And the consumer was limited too. The consumer almost back then more needed to go to a professional realtor who had access to the whole inventory to help them solve their housing needs. Here comes the internet, and before too long, now the consumer is, technically is able to find out about a new listing almost as quickly as a real estate agent. And if they're diligent and if they're really working hard, they can, they can outrun. And if an agent's working with 20 clients, one client can outrun them, on their particular needs. And so I think the consumer is better educated, more aware, more fully aware of all. By the way, we all know there are exceptions about listings who don't
Right.
ever hit maybe the public market and get quietly marketed some other way. And that's always been an issue, and I suspect always will be. But I think today's consumer is the best educated and most aware in all of the time. It's just gotten more and more consumer facing. Actually, if I were to tag on from broker centric to agent centric, it has also gone agent centric to consumer, broker agent centric to consumer centric.
Gotcha. Yeah, and that's a great segue into kind of the technology portion of it. Obviously, over your 56 years, technologies, we've seen a lot of advancements, but I thought it was you. One thing you mentioned to me was because I mentioned the book. We all know the book, and you
Yeah.
actually you were like, "Hey, the book was an advancement at the time, right?"
Yeah, I'm so old. How old are I? I'm so old that the book that everybody complains of, people look at the book as sort of the base of data from which all this great new systems grew. Uh, when I started, there wasn't a book, and when the book came along, it was the greatest technological advancement of its time. It was prior to that, the MLS delivered triple mimeograph listing sheets where you tear them into three, I don't know, 4 by 6 sheets. You put them in a shoebox, and you would organize them however you organize things, like by area and then by price and bedrooms and all that. In fact, the agent in the office who had the most organized shoebox was the most popular agent in the company. And so when all of a sudden the book came out and the whole inventory was there, there was no effort to organize it. It was only a week or two behind, right? And so it was. That's a good example of your perspective on change. And I should have started by saying, I can't quote the person who said it, but the one thing in life that's constant is change.
Yeah,
And no matter where you are, what you're doing, the constant is always changing. And so we went from the book to actually, I had a teletype. The next thing I had in my office was a teletype that actually you had the book, but you had a teletype giving you momentary updates. So it became almost real time to get a teletype printout of all the listings up until an hour before you push the button.
wow. It is
So,
it is everything's relative, right? I mean,
uh,
and yeah, I remember when, we had the books still, the books when people would come, agents would come and they'd give us their license and we'd share give them the book still for some of
yeah,
those really older kind of
yeah.
listings, right? I don't know if
And
we still
don't
do that or not.
And don't show it and don't let anybody look at it. This is private information and you can't share it with anybody.
It's and along those lines, so I guess the book obviously at the time, huge advance. Was there maybe one certain technological development? I mean, syndication, obviously the internet, right? There was syndication. Could you place your finger on one thing, or is it kind of just kind of a hodgepodge of just more and more information out to the consumers, and
So
to the agents?
I kind of put it in before internet and after internet. Let's put it this way: the best agents, the ones who were able to generate the revenues. So you start out, you have a listing, and you put it into the multiple listing service, which was immensely valuable then as it is today. I think it's at least as valuable today as it was back then. But back then, you had the agents, they would do mailers. They would have a listing farm and they would have the mailing addresses, the snail mail addresses of everybody in their farm. And some of them would have a big farm that might have 2,000 in their farm or only 500. But the point is, it was every way you could figure out how to distribute information on your new listing and get your name out there.
Mhm.
But those were all, 100 different ways people tried to do that. Once the internet came along, it was like push a couple of buttons and everybody can look at it. It didn't happen overnight. Don't forget that part.
Right.
The Zillows and the Realtor.coms and the Homes.com, weren't as organized as they are in the beginning. And so actually the brokerage, if you may recall, but in the beginning, the brokerage companies tried to compete against each other with their online site, their online listing. So Coldwell Banker had a website, and Cornish and Carey had a website, and Fox and Carskadden had a website, and you were sort of trying to get people's eyes. But even the consumer back then wasn't. You had to be a fairly astute consumer to know to go on and find it, and it was still a pretty complicated process. And that has, fundamentally gotten pretty organized. Although for this group, all members of or subscribers to MLS listings, uh, those 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 platforms aren't as accurate or thorough or complete yet as the MLS is, and it's hard to imagine that they will get equals to what we, at least here at MLS listings.
Right.
I don't know if everybody here understands, but we're unique as an MLS in the sense that only a few MLSs in the country have their own engineers who get to do a lot of stuff that the other MLSs can't do. And that allows us to have, what, in my opinion, the greatest quality of data available for our properties that is there. And 30% of that doesn't ever get moved out to the world. It's all in the MLS, and it's information that you need to be a professional to sell property.
Well, I'm sure more technology, and I'm sure, we've got AI now come, all the more stuff and more technological, but it really does come, one thing that kind of stays the same is it's still, real estate is still a relationship, right? Business. I mean, that part really, I mean, would you agree that that hasn't changed? And even with the technology, it's still a
Yeah.
relationship business.
Again, I may sound a little old-fashioned, but ultimately, the consumer, I think, needs a professional advisor that they trust, who they know understands the business. It's like I can remember when they came out with the income tax services. Oh, well, this is great. I don't have to pay my accountant anymore to do that. And I think I probably did it twice, and both times I did it, I thought, well, I'm not really sure I got everything there. I think I'll take it down to my accountant and ask them to look it over to see if I did it right. And I needed more advice than even the tax things did. And that's what's true here is particularly with homes. I see some people here I've known a long time who are more on the commercial side, and that's more of a spreadsheet business, numbers, return on revenue, kind of market. But for houses, it's an emotional thing for the family that is buying it. It's emotional for the family who's selling it. There are a lot of complications. I don't know. Somebody could argue we made it complicated with a 35-page contract, but we didn't do that. The consumer and the legislator all did that. But ultimately, you need to be nose to nose, I think, a customer. I've been in the real estate all this time. I moved, you know what? My wife and I moved to Colorado 3 years ago, and we've both been in real estate for decades. And the first thing we did was find a really good realtor to help us differentiate between the neighborhoods and the houses and prices. And as hard as we tried, we wouldn't have educated ourselves sufficiently to be as knowledgeable. I'm talking about a good agent. I'm going to go off base here just a little bit because I'm going to say I don't think, the consumer only buys and sells, most consumers only buy and sell a house every, I don't know, 5, 6, maybe it's 10 years now. And so even if they knew how to do it back then, it's all changed in the last 10 years and they're not as familiar as they are now. More importantly, I don't know if they recognize the difference between a great agent who knows what they're doing and has all of the risk management tools at their fingertips and understands the market, or they had an agent who didn't know any of that and just sort of was stumbling along. And I've watched situation after situation after situation where a client will leave a transaction, and I'll know that they didn't have a good transaction, but they didn't. They didn't know that, and so you really need that personal interaction with the agent. I think most consumers I think it's evidence. There's not a lot of evidence of people, even with all of the new changes that have recently gone through about buyer agency and all of that. People are still going to agents because they need an agent to help them through the transaction.
Yeah, I mean it's one of the biggest thing purchases we'll buy in your lifetime for most people, right? I think just the fear of litigation alone, the risk management, like you mentioned it, But since we mentioned the agents, is there in your looking back and just is there a certain traits you would look for in an agent that you think makes an agent successful?
Yes, but they probably aren't what you might consider the obvious. But it's pretty obvious if I've been doing this long, I must have started pretty young. And so
Mhm.
when I went out to classes when I was young to become a manager, one of the first classes I went to said, "How do you pick a successful agent?" And everybody raised their hand. This is what I look for. This is what I look for. He said, "Well, you can't tell a good agent when you see one." He said, if you lined up and take a big company with a lot of agents, if you lined up your top 100 agents and lined them all along, in looking at them, what is it? What, they're different as day and night. In fact, one of the reasons I've loved this industry is because of the nature of agents. They're independent, they're free thinking, they're artistic, they're imaginative. Um, they wake up every morning without a job. They're unemployed. They don't get a paycheck. They don't get benefits. They only get paid on being successful. And um, the people that I've seen come into the business that are successful probably a compelling desire to be successful is right up there. Everybody said, well, they need good people skills, and I would agree with that. But I watch some agents that I think are great agents, and they don't appear to me to have people skills, but they're able to communicate with their clientele to the point that they get repeat referral business over and over again. So I'm not sure you can even figure that out. I think they have to be adventurous because if you accept the top 20, the 20-80 rule, and that the top 20% of agents are the ones who really do a lot of business and make a great revenue. Um, they're organized, they're driven, they're willing to do things other people aren't willing to do in terms of what needs to be done to be successful. I've always enjoyed in this industry, you can go out and somebody like Brian Buffini or somebody else sits down and just lays out what you need to do to be successful. And you have 1,000 people in the audience, and Brian Buffini himself would say, you know, about 20% of you are going to listen to this and go do it and be successful, and 80% of you aren't. And that's the differentiator is that they're willing to do. It's no secret what you need to do to be successful. It's a matter of getting up every day and applying it every day, even if you don't feel like doing it, even if um, you've gone out 60 days in a row without any success. You just keep doing it because sooner or later it'll fall into place. So
Yeah. Yeah. And, to kind of add on to that, you mentioned resiliency because, we've been through, there's a lot of change in the industry and we've had clear cooperation and the whole NAR implementation, compensation and it's always, oh my goodness, it's the end of the world. This is going to doom the industry. But, you've been through, obviously for 50 years, the same, maybe different challenges, but challenges
yeah,
nonetheless, right, over the last 50 years. But yet agents always find a way to continue to do business and life goes on, right? I guess my point is have you seen a few things in the past where you thought, oh, how are we going to get past this? Kind of like
yeah.
what, agents today and
The way I like to look at it, and at the risk of offending anyone, I don't intend to. I actually asked someone one time because I heard that the Chinese symbol for change is a two-part symbol. One is crisis, one is opportunity. And in my experience over all these years, having watched so many people be successful, those successful people, when change comes around, they don't not see or ignore the crisis part of it, but they look for and find the opportunity on the other side. And so when this whole issue came along about clear cooperation and buyer agents, the lawsuit, not so much clear cooperation as the lawsuits, and it was, oh my God, they were never going to be able, they were never going to be able to deal with this. This is going to be too complicated. Well, over all of my years, whatever change, and by the way, there were plenty over those years where everybody said, oh, wow, how are we going to deal with this? And the answer is the really good people. The ones who are, professionals and successful and imaginative, they figure out how to deal with the changes and make it an opportunity. And honestly, by doing that, they further differentiate themselves from the people who aren't willing to go through those changes. And so my sense, even though we're probably only halfway through or less, I don't know what percentage we are through all of the buyer agency changes, and there'll be legislation and the laws will change and you're going to have to keep up with it. But if you watch, those people who have been successful in the business will continue to be successful in the business. They'll adapt and change accordingly. And new people coming in, I've heard people say, well, you can't hardly start in the business as a new person anymore. The answer is yes, you can. You always could. You always will be able to. You just have to, figure out the difference between the crisis and the opportunity and the change.
Good point. Well said. So Larry, let's say you were starting out today, right? Well, would you do anything differently?
I didn't know what real estate was when I started in the business. Honestly, I was 22. Don't do any math out there, but I was 22 years old and hadn't really done anything in the financial world. And I had the opportunity, someone suggested I go into real estate. And as it turned out, I was kind of good at it. And it went from there. So if I did anything different, I don't think I would just stumble into it blindly. I think I'd talk to people. I will say this, I still believe a lot that for a new person, you know, probably a more traditional brokerage company with a strong brand and a strong training and orientation mechanism. You know, I've yet to find anybody who got their, passed their real estate exam and knew anything from that study that they needed to know to be successful in the real estate business. It's sort of like you got to get all those answers correct, and then you have to go in and figure out what to do to be successful in real estate. And the bigger branded companies, and this is nothing against small brokers. And by the way, there could be a small broker who is set up to accommodate new agents and teach, train, and do all of that. But if I were going in today, I would probably hook myself up to a known brand, and I would pay close attention. I know, you're independent contractors as an agent, and so the manager can't really tell you what to do, but I'd like a manager who could help me decide what to do, with the best of them, someone who's good at working with new agents. In fact, here in Colorado, I found a young man, and by the way, this sort of is in my blood. He didn't know what to do. I said, have you thought about real estate? And I called my old company, Coldwell Banker here. I used to be in charge of Colorado, but nobody knows that from here. I'm too old. But uh, I tracked down the fact that there's a manager in the Denver marketplace who specializes in bringing new agents along. And so I referred that person into that system. And I think it happened to be a he, will be, if he's successful, if he's one of the 20% who are going to do everything right, he'll learn it the best probably in that system.
Mhm.
So
And Larry, I was just writing like, because you told me how much your first house you sold? What was that? Was it 42,000?
actually, I was thinking about that story. Yeah, the first house I sold 56 years ago was in a very, very nice area in Sacramento, and it was $42,500. And in fact, today it's probably 1.5 or $2 million. But the funny thing is, when I went up to run Lion Real Estate up there for 2 years or almost 2 years, I mentioned that was my first house, and the manager raised his hand. He said, "Not only is that," I said the address and the name of the buyer, and he said, "The guy still lives in the house." And that was after 45 years. And
Wow.
I realized how valuable that decision that customer, that consumer made to buy that house way back. I knew he was stretched. He was stretched to the limit.
Mhm.
And I'm sure he was probably stretched for 2 or 3 or 4 years afterwards. But his income grew into the house, and here he has probably the biggest asset of his financial portfolio. So it's like what a favor you do for somebody if you sell them a good piece of property, a home or a good piece of property, particularly in the line of growth or in good areas. What a meaningful decision that is. But yes, it was 40. I sold a house for $8,000 in a less expensive part of Sacramento at the time.
8,000. Wow. Yeah, that's we all know today's prices and good Lord. But that's I always laugh at it. It's 42,000. Wow. And we just had, we just did a podcast with Jordan Levine, the CAR economist, and it was just along those lines. He was pointing out just the discrepancy of wealth for, homeowners compared to renters is amazing. And so yeah, that decision to buy, especially back then when those prices were low. Um,
Actually, when that was happening in Sacramento, my brother-in-law and sister-in-law lived in Palo Alto, and
mhm.
they bought a house for $60,000, and we thought that they were crazy. So there you go. Remember what Leslie Appleton Young, and I'm pretty sure it's her answer, although Bill Jansen suggests that it might have come from him, but there's no argument. Somebody asked Leslie Appleton Young when the best time to buy a home is, and her answer is 5 years ago. She always had that answer all the time. You know,
I know
not so
Michelle.
much not so much that there's a particularly good time. It's just almost certainly 5 years after you buy it, you're going to be better off.
Yep, yeah, yeah, exactly. I know Michelle would agree with you if she was here today, Ronka.
No,
Um, but and Larry, you mentioned your group, and the fact that as an MLS, we are really we have a great our own great engineering department. So when we've kind of had some shows on this in the past where we get to make decisions, our executive team on is it more feasible to build something out with our team or to acquire something, right? Um,
yes.
but do you want to expand on that maybe a little bit?
Sure. I happen to be, even though I'm a broker by, my career, and I call myself a technology enthusiast. I've always like been, early adopter and all that, but I'm not really a technology person, but we have a crew of people. The whole company is made up of about 50 people, and about 20 of them are engineers. These numbers sort of change. Some of the engineers are what they call gig, meaning that they come on for certain jobs. But we have a core of great engineers, and I'm going to use members only as and this whole legal lawsuit thing is and clear cooperation has been kind of crazy, kind of
Mhm.
fast. And we adopted a long time ago, early on in the process, the board of directors wanted to be imaginative in this and looked proactively at how could we do what the the lawsuits were trying to accomplish. And we came up with something that's pretty unique today. What is it, 4 years later? I don't have the clock ticking, but um, we have a system. In fact, again, well, I won't get political here, but we have some of the bigger companies, arguing about clear cooperation. And what you're hearing is, well, the consumer is entitled to options. And our board of directors told us to come up with an engineering plan that would allow us to provide all those options to the consumer through our subscriber agents. And we came up with members only. And somebody might think, well, that's a pretty complicated process. But in the system that our engineers developed, I mean, the concept came from the board of directors, but the engineers came up with a solution. And you have the absolute flexibility that allows clear cooperation to be implemented without limiting somebody to the options of how they can, at least within, uh, I have, I probably am not qualified to talk about my attitude about clear cooperation until after July 1st, when I'm no longer affiliated
Right.
with MLS listings. But there was a case, and today, even Robert Redfin of Compass called our CEO, Dave Wetzel, because he knew that it was we were pretty close to what he was wanting to do, and he was trying to figure out how to do it. And so we were unique, and I don't mean not solely unique. I think there's two or three other MLSs out of 500 MLSs, that came up with a early solution that we haven't had to change. After they keep changing it. If you follow organized real estate, they keep changing this and changing that. But our system basically has stayed in place because it responded with an engineering mind to it, to the right way to implement that. So that's a good example, I think.
Yeah, no, it's a great example. And NAR, they just came out, it was what like a month ago with their announcement that delayed marketing and And we really kind of a pat on the back to our team here because we already had that with our members only solution where because we don't syndicate out. And so it really, we were ahead of the game even then. Some other MLSs are going to have to make some adjustments, but we really were like, we were
Yeah,
out there on our group and saying, hey, you know what? It's really kind of a nothing announcement for us because we don't
right.
anticipate having to do anything.
You don't have to change anything. That's right.
Yeah. Larry, last question, and then let's go ahead and let's open it up to some Q&A and see if anyone has any questions for you. But the Larry crystal ball, as you step away from the the industry, what do you think will define the next 10 or 20 years of residential real estate, if you had to guess?
Well, I'll start at the base. I think there will always be the need for an agent in a transaction
Hmm,
for most consumers. You've always got the people on the fringe. I'm going to go buy it myself. I'm going to save money on the commission by doing this and that. But most people recognize the need for a trusted advisor to help them make the biggest financial decision of their lives. And of course, everybody tells me you won't believe what AI is going to do. And I, uh, my experience with AI so far is every now and then it really screws up badly, and you can't tell unless you double check it. Now that you know, I you tell me, you tell me 10 years from now what AI is going to do have done to change life. I don't think it is going to replace a human relationship on a transaction like a house. You mentioned earlier about the liability. In the transaction, the seller has liability. And that's where all of the disclosure, 80% of all of the problems in real estate are failure to disclose. And from the seller's standpoint, well, if I knew the roof was leaking, but I didn't happen to mention it.
right.
Well, that's a big problem. On the other hand, the buyer, even if they think they know all about what they're doing, they're going in at the risk of having things discovered after the escrow closes that cost them a lot of money. And so all of that says to me, and in particular, it's so emotional where your family is going to live and the environment that there will always be a need for an agent. The brokerage side of the business is the one that's been having the biggest disruption because now there's, I don't know, 100 different uh, compositions of a brokerage company with agents. You have one broker for the whole state of California, and there's 1,000 agents or whatever it is. Don't ask me, how to do that, but it's out there and it's legal. And so the model of the brokerage side of the business, I'm sure will change. In fact, you're seeing a little bit of some of the financial companies buying into the brokerage companies to attach them to their mortgage operations. That's as old as the wind. Sears tried to do that back in the 80s. They had the financial network, and they had an insurance company, mortgage company, savings bank, whole bank of real estate. Okay. Well, now you got the big money coming in, but there needs to be agents, and they need to have a broker, at least so far by state law, and I don't know that the state law will change that. The agent needs somebody to say they're supervising that. If I had to predict anything, I think it's possible that some agents, I've seen this over the years, some agents, there have been experiments where instead of being an independent contractor, you bring the agent on as an employee. And those moderately worked back 10 and 20 years ago. There were some experiments. They didn't really work out, but they kind of came close. And so I think the issue of employee versus independent contractor may crop into the coming years, at least with some different models. But I still think there'll always be a need for an agent and a trusted advisor in the transaction. By the way, I think that applies to commercial and investment properties as well as residential.
Oh, sure. Wonderful. Wonderful. So yeah, Larry, let's go. You probably could go for hours. You've got so many stories and things, but let's go to Q&A and see what we've got. Any questions here? I know we've had some kudos out there and thank yous, and so thank you everybody for the kind words and chat. But let's see here. Kim was asking your team. I think one of these days I need to have them on here
Yeah.
because they could go ahead and probably tell us some
I'm
of
glad
this.
you mentioned that because filling out the remarks is painstaking for some
It
people.
is.
And if you just tell the three key points, AI will help you write your remarks section.
Yeah, it's because one thing we always get, Larry, is as from agents is can you make it faster to list a property? It takes too long, and we've definitely added things like the remarks and things, and I'm sure as we progress there'll be even more, but that's kind of always the thing we hear is, hey, can faster? But there is at some point some due diligence. You got no technology
Yeah.
can only take you so far, right?
Yep.
That there's going to always be that need to kind of have your own due diligence and put it in. I always say never copy and paste AI straight in, right? Maybe take some things from it, but be careful of just copying. We do have one other, I think, question here from Joel, and was wondering if you had any thoughts, Larry, on a cloud-based brokerage like LPT or EXP Realty compared to more traditional style brokerages. Are there any pros and cons you think in that kind of a style?
Well, I go back to the basics on that, and I'm not saying either type of company
Sure.
cannot accomplish the mission. But to me, the oversight of the agent and the training of the agent and the risk management system in place to make sure that the agent takes all the steps necessary and does all of the things that are necessary for a successful transaction. So if I were to go out and look at companies, and you named a few, I won't name them, what I'd want to know, and if I was a new agent going in, I think most people are honest people. They want to do a good job. If I was a new agent going in, I would want to know what you're going to do for me to keep me out of trouble in the marketplace with my clients and with the transactions. And I'd like to see it, and not just, well, this person is that you're a broker and they're selling 10 houses a month, and while on the side they will show you how to do the business. um, that doesn't work for me. Okay, and maybe you can be an apprentice, maybe you can start out as an assistant in some form. Anyway, uh, all of those models, they're all out there now. And I alluded earlier that there are models that you wouldn't have thought of 10 years
Right.
ago. And I don't necessarily criticize them, but I'm as curious as if I was interested in pursuing it, which I am not as of the 1st of July. I would want to know how they put quality performance training into the new agent that's joining their company.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Larry,
Proper supervision.
yes. Larry, I want to say congratulations first off on a great career, 56 years. Fantastic. Congratulations on your upcoming retirement. Um, and this has been fantastic. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on here and do that. Thanks also for everything you've done for this company, MLS Listings and the industry. I know we put on there as marketing, trailblazer, and it really, you really are, fantastic career. And I just want to thank you so much for everything you've done with MLS Listings, and you're a class act. I wish I was able to work more kind of under you. I've worked for some great people at this company, but I wish I had a chance to maybe work a little more under you as well. So I just want to say thank you, and I see a lot of people in the chat are saying thank you as well. Um,
Well, I've had fun for all those years. As bad as things got sometimes, the overriding thing that made it fun for me was the quality of the people that I was working with. And I will say this, at MLS Listings, there's no finer group of people, hardworking, intelligent, intended to do great service out to the subscribers of MLS Listings. And that's made it easy for me to be surprised that I ended up spending 10 years here. So it was
awesome.
all about the people. And MLS Listings is full of great people.
Thank you so much, Larry. Thank you, everybody, for attending. And I hope, like I said, we're going to continue to have probably Dave Wetzel on here in the following weeks and some more. So I hope to see everybody here again. And, thanks so again, Larry, and everybody take care, huh? Make sure to check out our pro support page for additional videos on a full range of topics. And don't forget to click that subscribe button on our MLS Listings YouTube page.